Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Sagan Conspiracy, NASA's untold plot to suppress the People's Scientists' theory of ancient aliens, by Donald L. Zygutis, narrated by Mike Chamberlain. Introduction. If we are poking around in neighboring worlds in our planetary system, then should not intelligent beings elsewhere in our solar system, as Lowell thought, or in other planetary systems, of which we now know there are many, shouldn't they be visiting here? Carl Sagan. Having studied his writings for more than 50 years, I consider myself somewhat of a Carl Sagan scholar, but I am hardly alone in that regard. Sagan, a Pulitzer Prize-winning author, had, and still has, millions of loyal followers all around the globe who enthusiastically devoured every word of every book he ever wrote. My bona fides is my claim to be the world's foremost authority on Sagan's ETI beliefs, particularly his work on ancient alienism. With this book, I believe I am the first to recover and make public written material on ancient alienism that was crafted by Dr. Carl Sagan that has been suppressed and covered up by NASA. It introduces something that few knew existed, an obscure 1962 scientific paper researched and written by Carl Sagan with the funding of a NASA grant while he was a Miller Research Fellow at the University of California at Berkeley, then completed and published while he was working as an assistant professor of genetics at Stanford University. A document that reveals a comprehensive model of ancient alienism developed by Carl Sagan that adheres to all the rules and strictures of the scientific method. It is a model crafted by a scientist who expected it to be evaluated by his peers in the scientific community. It was peer-reviewed and published in a respected scientific journal, Planetary and Space Science, an elite and specialized journal that is still in the business of publishing the research of the world's top space scientists, after which it effectively disappeared. Mysteriously, no one spoke of it, no one critiqued it, and no one referenced it. Through the years, as Sagan became famous, nothing was ever said of that paper. Today, it is probably fair to say that not 1 in 1,000 people who think they know Carl Sagan are aware of its existence, and even fewer know that what he wrote in 1962 about interstellar spaceflight and past alien visitations to Earth, he continued to believe with great passion until his death in 1996 at the age of 62. 30 years later, after SETI, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, failed to detect an alien signal with radio telescopes, a mature Carl Sagan, by then the best-known scientist on the planet, was preparing to defy NASA, break his silence, and announce to the world his conviction that Earth is a visited planet. My charge is that in 1964, NASA officials, under the direction of the Pentagon, made the fateful decision to suppress the writings and muzzle the voice of a young Carl Sagan regarding his belief in ancient aliens. This is an attempt to hold powerful institutions and individuals accountable for their actions. Of course, I expect loud cries of indignation and categorical denials from representatives of all the accused parties. But, hopefully, along with their protestations and denials, they will answer the tough questions and address the straightforward issues that I raise in this book. If any of them want to confront me head-on, either in print or face-to-face in a public debate, I will be available. The Conspiracy Theory. In this book, I charge NASA with conspiring against Carl Sagan to keep knowledge of his belief in ancient aliens away from the public. Did Carl Sagan believe in ancient aliens? The paper written by Sagan, funded by a NASA grant, is indisputable proof that he did. Has the public been led to believe that Carl Sagan supported SETI's attempt to intercept an alien signal with radio telescopes? Absolutely. Was Carl Sagan convinced from the beginning that the odds that a radio telescope search would be successful were basically nil? Without a doubt. There are two ways one can become a conspiracy theorist. The first is to concoct a sensational scheme out of thin air, and then argue for it with all the fire and passion of a revival preacher. Evidence be damned. The second way is to uncover a legitimate conspiracy, do your best to collect and assemble all the evidence you can, and then turn it into a book that reasonable people will find compelling, and then look for a publisher daring enough to put it into print. After all, it involves a man of tremendous scientific stature, Carl Sagan, the world's leading space agency, NASA, the world's largest ETI search organization, SETI, and, behind the scenes, lurking in the shadows, the Pentagon. We're not talking about small potatoes. Other than to cite the agencies involved, I am not in a position to disclose the names and titles of individuals responsible for this travesty of justice, and for that I am thankful. My interest is not to indict people for wrongdoing, as much as it is to focus on the positive and broadcast Sagan's ancient alien research to as many people as I can in as short a time as possible. With that goal in mind, I urge everyone to tell others about this book and pass it on to a friend when you are finished. Spread the word that Carl Sagan was an ancient alien theorist. The more people who know the truth, the sooner NASA, SETI, and others will be forced to admit to the truth. The ultimate dream of any investigative reporter is to uncover a major conspiracy and expose it in print. But to be believable, they have to produce facts, not innuendo. The evidence has to be reproducible and verifiable, not hearsay. Sagan's research paper is fact. Sagan's ancient alien writings in Intelligent Life in the Universe is fact. That the last paper he was working on before he died was about spacefaring extraterrestrials is fact. Fill these facts in with NASA obfuscation and a veritable mountain of circumstantial evidence, and in my estimation, there is more than enough material to prove a NASA conspiracy. Like a book, the NASA conspiracy against Carl Sagan has 3 parts. A beginning in 1964, when NASA suppressed his work on ancient alienism. A middle from 1964 to 1990, when Sagan was not permitted to openly express his views on ancient alienism. And an ending, when he was preparing to defy NASA, break his silence, and take his ancient alien views public. Before he was able to complete his last paper, which was on ancient alienism, he died. This book is based on the actual writings of Carl Sagan that conclusively prove that he believed in ancient aliens. Is there speculation? Of course. Do I at times extrapolate? I plead guilty. But one thing I don't do is fabricate. I am sharing what I know as an honest truth seeker, and I stand prepared to be corrected if I am wrong. This is not the end of proving a conspiracy. It is only the beginning. And in short order, I expect both a public and a scientific consensus to emerge that I am right. Sagan looked at the subject of past alien visitations to Earth through the critical eyes of a professional scientist. With earned degrees from Harvard and the University of Chicago, and an advanced understanding of the scientific method, he anticipated that what he wrote about ancient aliens would be meticulously scrutinized and critically analyzed by his peers in the scientific community. Only those claims and calculations that managed to survive the harsh gauntlet of expert examination would be allowed to stand, and those only conditionally, because all scientific claims, regardless of how well founded they might be, are always open to challenge. That was the way that Sagan wanted it to be. He never had any intention of circumventing scientific protocols and going straight to the public with his research. That high standard is reflected in the technical and scientific nature of the paper that he wrote while at Stanford University. The book you are listening to is, to my knowledge, the first book of what I expect to grow into a new literary genre, science-based ancient alienism. There are, today, some working scientists and skilled writers trained in science who believe it possible that Earth has indeed been visited by aliens. Unfortunately, their voices are not being heard because of a justifiable fear that if they were to openly state their views, they would be discriminated against by the scientific establishment, i.e. NASA. It is my hope that, before long, credible arguments and evidence of past alien visitations to Earth can be submitted in scientific papers by mainstream scientists, with the confidence that they and their work will be treated fairly and professionally by their peers. What can be successfully debunked will be summarily but respectfully abandoned, and what can't be debunked will be the subject of advanced investigation and analysis. If my NASA conspiracy theory is true, how is it possible that the numerous authors who have written biographies about Carl Sagan over the years have failed to expose this? The fact is that several of them, and in particular Key Davidson, have properly pointed out that Carl Sagan believed in ancient aliens, and some, like him, alluded to this research, which I will refer to as the Stanford paper. But for a variety of reasons, not least of which is an almost hallowed reverence for NASA among writers of popular science, no one had identified all the various pieces of incriminating evidence and assembled them in a way that results in the inevitable conclusion that NASA conspired against Carl Sagan. Eventually, the truth was bound to come out. Better late than never. The modern public has little tolerance for scripted narratives that scrupulously avoid reality. Most people, I suspect, would prefer to know the unvarnished truth about Carl Sagan. Sagan himself was a study in contrast and complexity, outwardly supporting an ETI search strategy involving radio telescopes that he didn't believe in, while inwardly clinging to an ancient alien theory that he knew NASA would never endorse. Now, it's time that the truth about Carl Sagan be laid bare, as millions around the world pause to remember and honor a great scientist and an even greater human being on the 20-year anniversary of his death. After listening to this book, those who remain skeptical of my claim of a government conspiracy against Carl Sagan will be waiting for NASA and others to respond and prove me wrong. I have no problem with that. NASA deserves the right to defend itself. But if they have no rebuttal and are unable to refute my claims, will that convince the holdouts that my conspiracy theory is true? I would like to think so. But, at the same time, exposing a hallowed institution like NASA of a major cover-up against a celebrity scientist who faithfully served for 3 decades as its face and voice to the world is something so shocking that many will not be able to accept it, even in the face of overwhelming evidence. For the past 9 years, I have been on an incredible journey, uncovering secrets about Carl Sagan and ancient aliens that a lot of powerful interests were hoping would never see the light of day. Though the primary purpose of this book is to blow the whistle on a NASA conspiracy, it's also to repair a reputation that will help make Carl Sagan better known and more relevant in the 21st century than he was in the 20th. Carl Sagan's legacy deserves to be that he was the scientist who gave the world hope for a brighter future, and that, if we continue to build on the progressive principles that the founders of human civilization were taught by their alien visitors, there is nothing that can deny us that destiny. It takes teamwork to produce a book, and I would be remiss if I failed to mention some individuals who played key roles in the one you are listening to. My agent, Rita Rosenkrantz, to my senior editor, Michael Pye, to associate editor, Lauren Minoy, and to my line editor, Jody Brandon. If there were a literary equivalent of the Purple Heart, you would all be worthy recipients for enduring the foibles and follies of a fledgling author. And last, but certainly not least, to my partner, Sherry Subica, for her unflagging support and encouragement. My heartfelt thanks to you all. Chapter 1. Carl Sagan, Raw and Uncensored. Over the course of what most people would call a spectacularly successful career, Carl Sagan became a trusted scientist to a generation largely raised by parents who were disillusioned by Nixon, Watergate, and the Vietnam War. For reasons entirely justified, our parents were suspicious of politicians, big government, and scientists who they saw as little more than pawns of the military-industrial complex. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, a young, cool, and very articulate astronomer began popping up on college campuses, the Johnny Carson Show, and other places, talking about the virtues of the scientific method, the best process ever invented for determining what is true and what isn't. He didn't speak down to us. He related to us, and he made sense. He made non-scientific people like me believe that we were capable of understanding what science was all about, that it wasn't the boogeyman that people like me were hearing from our religious leaders, or that young people were learning from their parents. Quite the opposite. Science, he insisted, was humankind's best hope for the long-term survival of our species. Through advanced technology, Sagan assured us that we could clean up our polluted planet, control runaway population growth, achieve global peace, and bring nations and people together in common cause. We could explore space, visit other planets, and start colonies on the Moon and Mars. Carl Sagan, more than any other person on Earth, psychologically and intellectually prepared an entire generation to receive with open arms all the breathtaking possibilities of the modern computer age. But people who think they know Carl Sagan invariably know him the way that influential individuals and powerful institutions in charge of his legacy want them to know him. All along, throughout the course of his 40-year professional career, Carl Sagan believed that advanced extraterrestrials exist and that they have been to Earth. Carl Sagan was an ancient alien theorist, convinced that human civilization was a gift from visiting aliens. The truth is that from 1956, when Sagan was a 22-year-old whiz kid at the University of Chicago hobnobbing with Nobel laureates, until December 20th, 1996, the day of his death, Sagan not only believed in ancient aliens, he single-handedly built a scientifically rigorous model that makes it possible for ancient alienism to hopefully, one day soon, become a legitimate field of inquiry. In 1956, years before the SETI radio telescope experiment was launched, Carl Sagan saw clearly what NASA, SETI, and professional skeptics were either unable or unwilling to grasp: that in a 14-billion-year-old universe and a 10-billion-year-old Milky Way galaxy, if advanced aliens exist anywhere, they should have already discovered and visited the 4-billion-year-old pale blue dot, Sagan's term, that we humans call Earth. A simple theorem developed by Italian physicist Enrico Fermi as early as 1943 remains to this day a powerful argument in favor of Sagan's suspicions. Fermi's paradox notes the high probability of life evolving on many planets over vast stretches of time and space, and that many advanced extraterrestrials should exist. But so far, we have not seen any proof of or had contact with any such alien civilizations. The sheer number of statistically probable alien civilizations, contrasted with the complete lack of any proof of any alien existence, famously moved Fermi to ask, where are they? Today, more than a half-century after the search for extraterrestrial intelligence began, we still don't know whether we are alone in the universe or if we have cosmic company. Sagan was optimistic. Studies of the origin of the solar system and of the origin of the first terrestrial organisms have suggested that life readily arises early in the history of favorably situated planets. The prospect occurs that life is a pervasive constituent of the universe. By terrestrial analogy, it is not unreasonable to expect that, over astronomical timescales, intelligence and technical civilizations will evolve on many life-bearing planets. Sagan thought that in a few centuries, humans will have developed the technology for interstellar travel. If that is true, he pondered, shouldn't aliens, having civilizations possibly millions of years older and millions of years more advanced than ours, have already been to Earth? In the 10-year period between 1956 and 1966, he wasn't writing popular books, appearing on the Johnny Carson show, or hawking the virtues of space exploration to the masses. He had his nose set to the grindstone, engaged in the most ambitious project of his life, to build an airtight, science-based argument that Earth has been visited by advanced extraterrestrials. Ancient Alien Theorist. If you watch ancient alien documentaries on television, you hear the phrase ancient alien theorist mentioned over and over. A theorist is someone who develops and espouses a theory, which the dictionary defines as theory. Definition. 1. The analysis of a set of facts in their relation to one another. 2. A belief, policy, or procedure proposed or followed as the basis of action. 3. An ideal or hypothetical set of facts, principles, or circumstances. 4. A plausible or scientifically acceptable general principle or principles offered to explain phenomenon. 5. A hypothesis assumed for the sake of argument or investigation. 6. An unproved assumption. 7. Abstract thought. A theorist, according to the scientific definition of the word, is a lot more than a guy with an opinion. They invariably hold multiple advanced degrees from reputable institutions, an extensive curriculum vitae, and they usually sit at or near the top of their chosen discipline. A good example is Stephen Hawking, the English theoretical astrophysicist who formerly held Isaac Newton's Lucasian Chair in the Royal Society, who has made significant contributions to the science of black holes. Contrast this with the ancient alien theorists of television documentaries, who never cite their academic credentials or professional accomplishments, because they don't exist. Carl Sagan was an ancient alien theorist, in the same way that Stephen Hawking is a theoretical astrophysicist. He held advanced degrees in multiple disciplines from institutions like Harvard and the University of Chicago. A complete list of his academic and scientific awards and achievements would require pages. Though his specialty was astronomy, he had an amazing cross-disciplinary education that qualified him to speak out on a broad range of subjects relevant to space and to Earth. By any measure, Sagan had the perfect qualifications to be an ancient alien theorist, and that wasn't by accident. He chose to major in astronomy and biology, areas that would serve to enhance his credentials as an ancient alien theorist and equip him with the knowledge and skills that would be needed to find hard evidence to confirm his controversial hypothesis. In 1962, years before Carl Sagan became the famous astronomer and extraterrestrial hunter that millions grew to know and love, he held another title, Visiting Assistant Professor of Genetics at Stanford University. Carl Sagan, a geneticist? Yes, indeed. Along with an advanced degree in astronomy, Sagan held an earned degree in biology from the University of Chicago. The head of the genetics department, in fact the man that Stanford hired to establish it, was Nobel Prize winner Joshua Lederberg, 1925 to 2008. Knowing that Sagan's Miller Research Fellowship in Astronomy at the University of California, Berkeley was about to end, Lederberg persuaded NASA to grant Sagan a short-term appointment as assistant visiting professor in his new School of Genetics in Palo Alto, just across the bay. Lederberg had a keen interest in the possibility of extraterrestrial existence, and, from his willingness to allow Sagan to write the Stanford paper in his department and under his oversight, was clearly enamored of the possibility that visiting extraterrestrials may have influenced the human genome in a way that both qualitatively and quantitatively separates humans from other animals. His lasting contribution to modern astronomy is that he coined the term exobiology, which is currently one of NASA's hottest new disciplines. While he was at Berkeley, funded in part by NASA grant NSG 12661, Carl Sagan researched and wrote Direct Contact Among Galactic Civilizations by Relativistic Interstellar Spaceflight. In 1962, under Lederberg's oversight at Stanford, Sagan eventually published the paper that laid out the scientific foundation for his ancient alien theory. In the abstract, Sagan clearly stated his claim that there is the statistical likelihood that Earth was visited by an advanced extraterrestrial civilization at least once during historical times. In the Stanford paper, Sagan arrives at the conclusion that approximately 0.001% of the stars in the sky will have a planet upon which an advanced civilization resides, and statistics suggest that the Earth has been visited by various galactic civilizations many times, possibly approximately 10 to the fourth power, during geological time. In the late 1950s and 1960s, there were scientists in the Soviet Union who interacted with Sagan on the possibility of past alien visitations, but he was the only legitimate ancient alien theorist in the West to develop a formal model that included a search strategy and then presented to his peers in the form of a scientific paper for their consideration. It was subsequently peer-reviewed and published in a respected scientific journal, Space and Planetary Science. The extraordinary and completely unexpected pronouncement of past alien visitations to Earth by one of the preeminent SETI theorists in the world sent shock waves throughout the astronomy community. Yet, in a vivid example of how Sagan was decades ahead of everyone else in the field, the Stanford paper was a combination of existing SETI theory, hard science, and compelling logic. It is a model crafted by a scientist who expected it to be evaluated by his peers in the scientific community. Perhaps it seems contradictory that Sagan was also an iconic skeptic who spent his entire life debunking UFO claims, dismissing then-current UFO sightings as unreliable, thus rejecting the modern UFO craze as pseudoscience. But ancient legends related to the early Sumerians, including some recorded in the Old Testament, led him to a stunningly different conclusion about the possibility of past alien visitations. Some of the gods of antiquity could have been, and more than likely were, visitors from outer space. As Sagan narrowed the scope of his treatise, he refined his hypothesis by moving from a detailed explanation of how humans might someday achieve interstellar spaceflight to positing that godlike aliens were physically on Earth, our Earth, establishing a human civilization through the Sumerians. Sagan's own ethic, now popularly known as the Sagan Rule, was that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. His hope was for a discovery of direct evidence that would independently corroborate his hypothesis. His suggestion was that confirmatory empirical data might be found on the Moon, or possibly in ancient manuscripts. Man has since been to the Moon, and they didn't find any evidence of alien activity. But what about ancient manuscripts? The land of Sumer. Most people erroneously believe that ancient alienism began in 1968 with the publication of Erich von Däniken's Chariot of the Gods, which is why most people have the false impression that the subject is inherently pseudo-scientific. But the truth is that 10 years earlier, in the late 1950s, Carl Sagan, working off a collaboration with Russian scientists and Nobel Prize-winning geneticist Joshua Lederberg, formulated a mature and science-based theoretical model that had extraterrestrials mastering interstellar spaceflight, exploring the Milky Way galaxy, and visiting Earth at regular intervals. In 1966, in Intelligent Life in the Universe, Sagan expanded on his controversial theory by suggesting that an alien signal of some sort might be found in ancient manuscripts related to the Sumerians, people of an unknown origin and with an unknown language.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?